There's a new podcast from the TED Audio Collective I'd love to tell you about. It's called Body Stuff with Dr. Jen Gunter. Body Stuff reveals the lies we're told and sold about our health by exploring how the body actually works and some of the surprising backstories behind the health advice we're given. I mean, is it actually possible to boost your immune system? Do we really need 8 glasses of water a day? Find and follow Body Stuff with Dr. Jen Gunter wherever you're listening to this. Hello there, this is Chris Anderson. Welcome to another episode of the TED Interview, where we're trying to make sense of this crazy moment we're all in. Today, our attention is shifting from the coronavirus itself to the economic fallout from it. As everyone knows, there have been massive job losses, massive impacts on businesses of every kind. And the huge question is, how bad is it going to get? Where will this lead? Is there any prospect of any kind of return to normalcy anytime soon? Our guest today is Ray Dalio. He's the head of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. So Ray has been right in the middle of the stock market frenzy here, seeing valuations swing by many billions of dollars every day and trying to make sense of it. And what's remarkable about him is that as well as being an incredible trader and running an incredible trading operation, he really thinks strategically about the world and has been thinking about this current moment in the context of 1,000 years of history. Ray appeared in a slot right after the entrepreneur Marco Risova, who is one of the forces behind the globalhack.com, which is an ingenious global response to the coronavirus. And you may hear Ray mention Marco a couple of times. Okay, so Corey is actually the main interviewer here. I pop back in from time to time with questions from the online audience and some of my own. And I think you'll find some of this pretty shocking, honestly. But it's certainly fascinating, and it's such an important conversation to be having in this moment. As always, so that we could publish this episode quickly, it has not been edited. You're hearing it as it was. So without further ado, Corey Hajim and Ray Dalio.
So lay it on us, Ray. How bad is it? How worried should we be?
Well, I think you could look at this like a tsunami that's hit, the virus itself and the social distancing, and then what are the consequences in terms of the wreckage when you look at it. And I think you have to think of that as incomes and balance sheets, you know? So it was a tremendous income hit. And then the balance sheets, losses, and who has what savings and so on. And then how is that dealt with? And in order to understand that, you have to realize that there are these holes in income and the holes in the balance sheets. And then you have to realize that there is the production of money and credit. And who produces that money and credit? Okay, the money and credit comes in different flavors. There is US dollar money and credit. There is euro dollar money and credit. And so when you look at the world and you're seeing a situation that is the same as existed really in the 1930 to 45 period, in that now we're seeing the production of a lot of debt, a lot of borrowing by the government. We're seeing zero interest rates and not the traditional kind of monetary policy, but the producing of a lot of money and credit. So the Federal Reserve is buying the Treasury's debt, and the Treasury is getting that money to mostly Americans in some imperfect but remarkably large way. And the Europeans are doing the same in their way. That bank is a smaller bank because the world lives with about 70% dollars and only a small percent euro, and they will produce theirs for theirs. And there aren't many banks around the world. And so the rest of the world is going to have gaps, holes that won't be filled. So if you think about that and you say, American printing of money and the borrowing will leave us with a lot of debt and monetization. That's something interesting to talk about, and we need to talk about that. Who will pay these bills, and how will that be shared will be something we need to talk about. But you will know that you will get that money, and that the Europeans will get their versions of that money. But we are in a new world, and that world is most similar to the 1930 to 45 world, and a lot of the world will not get that money in credit. So there'll be a big differentiation as to which entities benefit and which entities don't. And there'll be a big collaboration as to how we will deal with that bill and who will end up with what. A big question of wealth distribution and all of that. So that's the big thing that's going to be happening.
How confident are you that some of that collaboration can happen right now?
We're now at one of those defining moments that I've seen repeatedly. The 1930 to 45 period, if you go back in history, there's nothing new to this. And it's a defining moment in terms of how people are with each other. So when you look at it, will people come together? Or when it comes down to it, really, will there be a taking care of oneself? And what does that define? And how will that go? That'll be, I think, a defining moment. So I look at these histories. If I can take a minute, I'd like to just paint a template for you that takes us, over the last 1,000 years, the things that have happened over and over again. There is one pattern that I'd like to convey. May I take a moment and do that?
Absolutely.
There are 4 things that are the driving forces of our economy and our lifestyle and wealth. And the first and most powerful is productivity, which comes from people learning and inventing and doing things well, just as Marco described. Okay? And it grows slowly. 1 or 2 or 3% a year, it grows slowly, and it's not volatile because knowledge isn't volatile, but it grows, and that raises our living standards over a period of time. Then there's a short-term debt cycle. The short-term debt cycle is, recessions and expansions and booms and recessions, that they last about 8-10 years. And then there's a long-term debt cycle. And that long-term debt cycle, which goes on about once every 50 to 75 years, is when you begin a new type of money and a new type of credit. That began in 1945. The New World Order, at the end of World War II, and with the Bretton Woods monetary system, created a new monetary system in 1945, a new money. So they wiped out pretty much the old money, or they largely disposed of it, and they began anew, and that's the New World Order, which was the American World Order, and we have seen it, and still 70% of the money and credit that exists in the economy is running by dollars. And what you have traditionally is the breakdown. And then the fourth influence is politics. And politics is largely how we deal with each other. And there's internal politics and there's external politics. The internal politics is, how do you deal with the wealth gap? How do you deal with the values gap? Do you have a common mission? Do we have an American dream that we can agree on and that we're pursuing that together? Or do you fight over wealth and so on? And so when you look at history, that's what revolutions are in their various ways. And there's always a revolution in one of these. Sometimes those are peaceful revolutions, and so sometimes they're disruptive. But it's a wealth shift that needs to take place. So the Roosevelt shifted policies and changed taxes and so on in that way. And then in other countries, there was the turning over democracy. Hitler came to power because of that gap. So how people deal with each other internally. There's also external politics. So that politics means between countries. And you have a situation when there's a rising power challenging existing power. There is competition and there is a risk of war. And so how they deal with each other, so that whether there's a greater good or whether they are fighting with each other, is the defining moment. There are always stress tests, these big stress tests that come along once every 75 years. And when they happen, and this is a stress test. And I think that what you're going to see is as how we deal with each other. There's enough wealth to go around, but what do you do when you're outside the ring of support, let's say of the US dollar? And what is that going to be like for those entities? Or if you're within the ring of support, how will that bill be divided? And how will we be with each other? I think we're going to have to reconsider who has what. What is it about education and so on? So that's what we're in, I think.
And I want to get to, because you've written extensively about how capitalism needs to change and some of the things that we should be thinking about and doing. And I want to definitely get to that a little bit later on. But I am curious right now, I mean, just from a practical level, do you think that we're headed into a global depression?
Yes, but I want to be careful about what I use the word, like to be technical.
Right, absolutely.
The word is an evocative word, and it could be scary and so on. So what do you mean by a depression? Okay. Something like happened in the 1930s. So just to repeat, 1929 to 1932, there was a fall in the economy and a very double-digit unemployment rates and a magnitude of fall in the economy like about 10%. Do I think we're in that? Yes. How was that dealt with? 1933. What they did is they printed a lot of money. And the government came out with the same type of programs that we're having now. Yes, okay, same thing. Zero interest rates hit zero. Same thing. Okay, same dynamics. And then there is that money causes an expansion from that point. How long does it take for the stock market to exceed its highs? Or how long does it take for the economy to exceed its former highs? A long time. Okay, do I think that's what we're in? Yes, that's what we're in. We've seen that happen repeatedly in history. So many times. It's just the most recent one. And there's a structure to that. So yes, this is not a recession. This is a breakdown, an operation that I'm just describing in terms of how it's dealt with, the production of money and credit, and all of that. That's what we're in.
And so you've talked about there's sort of four levers to recovery after a depression: cutting spending, also known as austerity, debt restructuring or forgiveness, redistribution of wealth through taxes potentially, and printing of money. Some of these things you've mentioned. Will those things get us out of this situation, since, as you feel it's happened before? But how would you think about balancing these tools right now?
Those are the tools since eternity, basically, since recorded history. Those are the ones that operated. And I think what you're going to see is a combination you're seeing of printing money and redistribution. And I think it'll last. These things happen pretty quickly. They last maybe a couple or 3 years in terms of that process. And then you have a rebuilding. And they're dealt with creativity. The greatest force through time is inventiveness, human inventiveness, adaptability. So you're going to see these restructurings happen, and you're going to see the kind of inventiveness that you just saw from Marco, okay? And it's the power of that adaptation that is the greatest power. I did a study, which is on LinkedIn if anyone wants to see it. And it goes back 500 years. And it shows real GDP. In other words, the economic activity going back there. And there's a line. And you don't see these depressions, as we're calling them, even on that line. They barely wiggles. When you go into it and you look at that piece, that's what it looks like. GDP falls 10%, unemployment goes up, and it passes. And because the greatest force is the force of adaptation and inventiveness if we can operate well together. So that's what I think it's going to look like over this period of time. It'll pass. The world will be very different. There'll be a new world order. But it will pass and will be inventive, because what we're dealing with now is just money and credit. Money and credit is just digital, I mean, there is real good services, those are real, but everything else is just accounting. And so when you change the digits and you work those things out and you work yourself through, that takes, a couple of years at most, kind of. And then you come back into a restructured environment. And it could be said that it is really healthy in many ways because it is a stress test. Because if you look at history, people have sometimes they get weaker or they're not prepared to, in many ways. Weaker in terms of maybe they don't build enough savings and they operate that, or maybe they emphasize luxuries over necessities. It's a reorienting type of experience that in many ways makes us healthy, even appreciating the basics of life.
Ray, just popping in here with a couple of questions from our online audience. I mean, the main question early on was just how difficult do you think, the days ahead are for the economy? And you've answered that very vigorously, like using that word depression. That's a very strong word. And tell me if I have this right. It feels to me like what you just said there is stronger than most people in the market seem to believe. The market is behaving as if, we've had the bad news and it sort of kind of wants to come back. And a lot of people seem to think that within, I don't know, a year, we'll be back where you are. You're saying, no, it's going to take longer. Does that imply that there is basically a sort of some systemic shocks that the market hasn't yet fully seen, perhaps to do with the inability of some players to handle the extreme levels of debt that are piling up right now as people can't work?
Yeah, I can't speak for what everybody's thinking out there. The markets are off depending on what market and depending on what country you're in, something in the vicinity of 25 to 45 or 50%, depending what currency you're managing in. And so if you're talking about emerging markets, they're worse because they're not going to get as much and so on. I can describe what I see. Okay. We see something like $20 trillion of losses. Okay. We see, so if you work that through and you say you don't have money, and you don't have credit, your business can fail. You know this. We see this all around us. So there can be failures when there can't be payments. And so the question is, who gets what check to make those payments and get past it? But we're going to have a giant restructuring of the IOUs, and we're going to work out when hospitals can go broke, because this is terribly costly for hospitals. And they will not fully recover their losses. Hospitals will go broke, even though we know that they need them. So when you have to go entity by entity through this, and then you'll go through the process of who will pay. So this is not, some people mistake this as there is a virus, and the virus may come and go. Okay, maybe we never see it again. I don't think that's likely, but the people who tell me say, but who knows? But if it never came back again, there will be those who are broke and who will have loss of income. We're going to change how we operate in a way. The supply lines are going to change. In other words, self-sufficiency. What is self-sufficiency now going to mean? Do we have enough of this and that? We're going to restructure our economy and restructure the financial system in ways that mean we are not going to go back to the way it was.
So do you see systemic threats to the financial industry as great or greater than happened in 2008?
Yeah, this is bigger than what happened in 2008. I'll distinguish it. In 2008, we had banks. It's the same thing, meaning you have a certain amount of leverage, things go down. Too much leverage means you're broke in accounting terms. So then you look around and you say, who are the systemically important entities that you don't want to go broke? Because do you want to lose those banks at this time? And then you can make up money and make up credit and you can keep them alive in some way. And you did it with banks, and through the banks, there were the mortgages, and that's what it looked like. This is more complex than that because there are the banks, and then there are all of those that are beyond banks, all of the little businesses, all of those in all the different places that are beyond it. And it's a bigger crisis, and we have a less effective monetary policy because interest rates declines have reached their limit. And just buying financial assets by the central bank and buying the normal financial assets won't work. They have to buy the debt of the government, and the government, or the many governments, have to be effective in getting buying power and production to those who need it around the world.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'll be back at the end of the hour, Corey. Let's be back to you. But so, given how bleak that is, people are asking what kinds of industries, organizations, companies have the best prospects of thriving going forward.
Well, that's the beauty of it. There are two types, basically. There are those that are stable meat and potatoes, not leveraged kind of companies. The Campbell soup equivalent, like everybody's going to use them all time kind of thing. And then there are the innovators. The innovators, like we're talking about Marco. You had Marco on before. And that new innovation, those who can adapt well and innovate well and don't have balance sheet problems. In other words, they have strong balance sheets, so they're going to be able to play the game without having that. They will be great winners. And so there's always new inventions, new creativity. That is the new adaptation that becomes a company and an entrepreneur. And they're going to do great, plus the stuff that we're always going to need. Those are the things that are going to do great.
Thank you, Ray. Corey.
Thank you, Chris. So I guess I'd like to stay with the market for a minute. Obviously, it's something that interests so many people, and the state of the market doesn't always correlate with what's going on in the economy. And the market and its players have changed so much over the past, 70 years or so, 70, 90 years. So many more algorithms and machines and passive investing. And how do you think that sort of affects how the market is behaving right now, how it's going to recover over the next, few years as the economy recovers?
The basic fundamentals of money, credit, crisis, who has what income, who has what expenses, who has what balance sheet, and how do we deal with money and credit. Those things which people often lose sight of because they happen only once in one's lifetime. This period, you have to go back to the 1930s as the last period. Those fundamentals of what a bank is and the associated process have existed all through time. Then it's like technology changes, technology evolves, and so the capacity to take one's thinking and to put them in algorithms. We've been doing this for 25 years. The way we operate is to take a principle, how would I deal with that situation, and write it down, put it into an algorithm, and then because the capacity to think has been radically enhanced because the human mind has a capacity problem. It's unique in inventing, but it can only process so much at time. So when worked in partnership with the computer, which has the capacity to take that thinking and replicate it and do all of that leverage thinking and think in an advanced way, that is the advancement of our time. And so you're seeing that. So when you think algorithmic, it's, you got to break it down as to what it is. Is it sensible cause-effect relationships that are being dealt with? It all comes back to, do you have understanding, and are you successfully betting on a cause-effect relationship? Because that's the only way you're going to make money. So, but the computer can do it and process that thing in a much more advanced way. So that's what's going on. There will be people who will make the mistake of just applying machine learning to the markets. And that won't work because of certain things. I guess I should explain because you asked. So on algorithmic decision making, there are two ways you can get your algorithm. You can specify the instruction to the computer and have it follow that, and that'll enable your thinking. Or you can have the algorithm come from putting a lot of data into the computer and asking computer, what would you do and what's your algorithm? The key difference between those is, do you have understanding of the cause-effect relationships? You must have understanding of the cause-effect relationships to know what to believe in, because you can't always get that in your sample size. For example, what's happening now, you could not have run your computer and have it in your sample size because you would have to go back to the 1930s to have an analogous period. So it is how you do that, but the capacity to learn, to invent, and to get, that leverage in decision making is greater than ever before. And that's the power of our time. Some will do it well, some will do it poorly, but it really comes down to, do you have the understanding of those cause-effect relationships so that you know how to place the right bet?
But that's very different from the passive investment market, which is such a huge part of it now. And that's where most people, the average person has their money. And I know that everything's changing day to day, but I also know that everyone's going to have this question on their mind. So I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to ask for specific investment advice, but everyone's thinking about their 401ks. Do you have any general thoughts about how people should approach this time period with that kind of money?
Yeah. First of all, an investor must understand that they probably will not be able to play the game well. They probably will not be able to decide how to move in and out of things. In order to be successful in the markets is more difficult than getting a gold medal in the Olympics. You wouldn't think about competing in the Olympics, but everybody thinks they can compete in the markets. But there's more money competing. It's like a zero-sum game, and there's more money doing it. And the worst thing you could do is think you can time all of these movements. I guarantee you the game's a tough game to time. We put hundreds of millions of dollars into the game every year, and it's tough. So what the individual investor needs to do is know how to diversify well. So the word that I would know how to diversify well and in a balanced way. The greatest mistake of all investors is to think that what has done well lately is a better investment rather than more expensive. And and what has done worse lately is the worst investment, get me out of it, rather than it's cheap. And unless you know how to deal with the differences of those, which most people don't, they're going to be in trouble. So understand that total amount of wealth in the world essentially doesn't change very much, okay? And that one thing goes up, another thing goes down. And to know how to diversify it in asset classes, to diversify it in countries, to diversify it in currencies, to know how to diversify that well so that you have wealth diversification is important. Do not think that cash is a safe investment. Most people think, look, I just want safety, and those bonds aren't giving me an interest rate and so on, so where do I get safe? Cash is a seductive investment because it doesn't have as much volatility, but it taxes you in your buying power about 2% a year. And so cash is almost always the worst investment. So you have to think about that. You should think a little bit unconventionally. Do you have a little bit of gold? Do you have a little bit of asset in case this monetary system breaks down and money's redefined? Do you have a little bit of that? I can't get into all the different ways that one can diversify well. I try to convey those things in my books or on posts posts on LinkedIn particularly. But I would say diversify well, be humble, don't market time, and be conscious of the dangers of cash.
Right. That's great advice. I want to ask one more sort of big picture question before we sort of get into how we should fix capitalism. We can talk about that in a minute, tackle that one. But I have been reading your series on LinkedIn, The Changing World Order. It's really fascinating. I'm curious what you think about, there's been sort of this retreat from globalization as something we should all get behind. And I'm curious what you think about that in terms of our recovery. This seems like something that is going to require a coordinated effort, financially, spiritually, in so many different ways. If we retreat from globalization right now, does that make everything harder going forward?
If we retreat from globalization, which we certainly will do, it will certainly make things very hard. And so we get down to the comparing idealism with reality. So when you say globalization and who will write what checks to people in countries that will be outside of their domain? And there are large numbers of those people. My wife and I are trying to help people in Connecticut. And, I can rattle off all that is and what a job that is and so on. And so when you have Congresses and presidents, and they start to say, who will we help? And how will that be? And what will that mean? It gets down to real practical questions. And the reality is a lot of those people won't be helped. And then you'll deal with how will they behave for each other? Are one country's vulnerabilities another country's opportunities? In such times, this is the case because Graham Allison wrote a book about the Thucydides trap, and he remind us over the last 500 years there have been 16 countries in which there's been a rivalry of an empire challenging another. In 12 of those cases, there have been wars because at the end of the day, there's not even a global legal system. Power is what is the currency of that. So when you get into how do you resolve a dispute as to who gets what, that becomes a very complicated question. So I'm a globalist. Meaning I have a dream and a wish that the best of the best can operate together and work together for that common good and so on. But it's dying because we're in an interconnected, fragmented world. The fragmentation of this, can I depend on somebody else to give me something I need? Or can I depend on them not taking advantage of me? No, you can't make those dependencies anymore. And that exists within countries as well as between countries.
Yeah, it seems like, you talk about productivity and the importance of productivity for us all to have a better life. And it just seems like on a global level, the same should hold true. If we're all focused on being more productive together and in that interconnected way, we'll all do better as opposed to kind of hoarding one asset or one set of resources.
You're certainly true. That has always been true, but never more true than today. And at the same time, read history and understand the mechanics and the issues and the challenges of this. This separation began before we had this isolation of the United States relative to the rest of the world. This deglobalization began before we had this that fosters more of it, right? And it happened for reasons, okay? So don't overlook those reasons and don't overlook the reading of history just because we wish it can happen. If you want to wish it happens, everything is all dependent on the behavior of those who have their hands on the levers of power. I would tell you, like, for example, right now, I've been going to China for a long time, and the Chinese, in many ways, are helping, in many ways, things that are needed in this crisis and all that. To even say that is a politically challenging thing, okay? Because we're in a world that is so fragmented that even to publicly say thank you, and thank you to many people and many companies, it's almost dangerous to say thank you to those who are helping, because we're now in an environment in which there are enemies, and who is evil, and do you fall into that category? And so the history of these is there's demonizations of different people. Okay, now you must see it around you. It exists. And so how we come out of this will be how we behave with each other.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think all of us here would say thank you to, the different people helping out in this situation. We do need each other. I do want to get to this issue of capitalism, because when we talked a few days ago, you mentioned, and earlier in this conversation as well, how, this period of time we can emerge stronger and better than before. And about a year ago, you wrote a piece about how capitalism needs to be reformed, focused a lot on the wealth gap, the growing wealth gap, and the problems that that's causing. So what's our opportunity here? What changes can we make?
Well, what I was seeing was, do we want the outcomes that we're getting, that the system is producing? Do we have, what is our American dream? What is that? We're not even almost talking about that. When I was growing up, so again, I grew up, I was born 1949, right after the New World Order was created. New World Order was created in 1945. And I'm 45. And that was when there was the breakdown of the system, and then we had a New World Order. We didn't have as much debt. We came back for the war, and there was an environment of equal opportunity. And that notion of equal opportunity. And there was an American dream, and there was a harmony and a going through it together. And by the way, that's not a one-off. If you read histories, you see these periods of collapse and clash and fighting, followed by these periods of, you construct the balance sheets, you change the system, and then you begin a new system, and you come back and you work together. And then I'm seeing around me, children in school and education systems in poor neighborhoods are sharing. They don't have adequate resources. There's no excuse. And so the idea that the profit system can accomplish everything is not right, because resource allocation goes to those who have the resource. And so throughout all history, you go back hundreds of years, you see that any system works for those who tend to control the system. So let's say we have a capitalist system, and we have entrepreneurs, and you acquire money and all that, and then you're working with those in government, and they have a symbiotic relationship, and it works well for them. So it's self-perpetuating, because the education of those who are those is better than the education of those who aren't those. So, for example, in our system, those in the top 40%, on average, spend 5 times as much money on their children's education than those who are in the bottom 60%. And so it's become self-perpetuating. And so when I look at that, I'm saying, I'm a capitalist. Please understand, I'm a capitalist. I believe in the system. I believe you can increase the size of the pie, and you could divide it well. And if we talk about how to do that effectively, we need to do it. But there becomes a time that there needs reforms. And those reforms have to create productivity. It doesn't mean just give money away. It means how do you make those people productive so that they're also psychologically productive as well as physically productive in producing output. You need to do that system. And so for reasons I wrote on that page, that post, it's on LinkedIn if people want it, that you need to restructure it. Now we are restructuring it. Okay. It's the inevitable consequence of what we're doing here. We will come out of that. There's been a tremendous transfer of wealth, whether people realize it or not, through the production of all of that borrowed money and all of that producing of money. That is a big force. We will come out of here. And the thing we will talk about over the next couple of years, and probably sooner rather than later, is how we do that restructuring. And my worry now is the same as my worry then, whether that will be done in a civil, bipartisan way that will both increase the size of the pie and divide it well, rather than damage the economy because you lose productivity. There are certain things that are great investments. Education is a great investment. The more people you have that are well educated and you had equal education, the more people you're going to have who have a chance to compete with each other and raise that over a period of time. It's a hell of investment. It will produce more productivity than it ever will cost if it's done well. But what happens is states and localities think of it as a budget item. So they look at expenses and they penny pinch on the education. Because if you're in a rich town, your kids will get a good education. And if you're not, and a large percentage of the population is losing that. So that has to be engineered well so that they're productive as well as divide the pie well. And everybody believes that the system is fair. If we can get there, am I optimistic that we will get there? I don't know. I would say I'm 60-40 pessimistic that we'll be good enough with each other to do that. But there's that possibility. This is our test. This is our stress test.
Ray, it's there's so much interest in this question of how we emerge from this, whether it's genuinely possible to rebuild the economy in a way that's fairer. I just want to read one last question. This one's from my Twitter feed. Do you think that the current crisis is showing that low-paid and or unskilled workers are what holds countries together, even more so than banks and hedge funds? And if so, as part of the rebuilding, can we build an economy that raises their interests higher?
The heroes are those kind of people. Okay, really. I mean, but it takes everyone. Okay, it takes the efficient allocation of resources as you probably have seen behind the scenes. We see those who control a lot of resources being able to make We're giving 60,000 computers to poor students so that they can learn. The difference between a rich and a poor student is having a computer and having the ability to learn. And I want to thank those who would be embarrassed and almost afraid to hear it, of how they contributed to that process. And at the same time, those other people who are every day serving in so many ways. So it's good character. And is that when the people came back from war and they were the greatest generation, it's that type of character and that brings our country together. But it each has to recognize their roles in doing that. So there's a CEO, and then there's somebody who's really a great hero on the front lines, and they better damn work well together. So yeah. And then they have to have usefulness, and we've got to appreciate them. We have to establish just the reality, I think, that there is a level of basic education, basic healthcare, basics that you cannot fall below. Okay? Otherwise, when you go below that level, there is no opportunity, and the costliness of it in the form of crimes and incarceration. Like to bring it personal, Our mission is to help high school kids who are drop out of high school and have jobs, to get them in the high school and through that in jobs. And we believe that we can do that and save a lot of money, because the average rate of cost of incarceration, depending, it goes from about $40,000 a year up to $120,000 a year, depending on the form. And if you get them in and move them into a job, you're going to save a lot of money. And we could do that cost effectively. But philanthropists can't do this alone. The amount of money is enormous. So if our country did those kinds of things, I think it'd be great.
Wow, thank you for that, Ray. Corey, what do you think? You got any other questions there before we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. I mean, I think we're going to get through it, I guess, is what we're saying. But we also have an opportunity here to make some changes and do better and emerge stronger. And to, as you said, take a look at things and the structures that we have in place and see where we can improve. But it's going to take a collective action and cooperation.
Yeah, Ray, I'm definitely inspired by the actions that you're taking as a philanthropist in this moment, and some of your peers. Like there are amazing stories out there. I was really struck by Jack Dorsey's announcement yesterday of his huge philanthropic contribution, and so I mean that's awesome. But equally
it's
important,
not nearly enough.
Well, exactly. And I'm kind of dismayed in a way to hear you say that you're 60-40 leaning pessimistic. Like it feels like your voice in these conversations that are going on in the corridors of power and in where the big money is, around whether this turns into fundamentally cooperation between countries and between companies and between, big money controllers, or whether it turns into a fistfight is so important. And I hearing you talk about the gratitude we should be feeling towards some aspects, let's say, of what China has done, like the extent. Do you find yourself in conversations like raising this, trying to take the view that no, you're needlessly sparking friction here. Take a more generous view, because it feels to me like there's so much at stake between how many people are trying to nudge that type of conversation versus the hostile, fearful conversation.
I think there's a general mistaken belief. I communicate a lot with the people that you're saying, people in positions of power, whether they're both in government or other places and so on, and have the thing. I think what you basically have to realize is that very few people are making decisions based on the quality of the argument, that most people most of those in the have a particular, are in a war of some kind or have a particular objective, and that the information that comes out, even in the media, you could almost see which side each media outlook or each person is on. How many people do you really believe don't have a side? Almost everybody they're on one side or another side. And the idea of being able to see things from both sides and come together is, in this time and through history, perceived as almost being weak or a threat. Because you got to get on one side or the other side and so on. And so it's not easy to just say out. I'm like all the people and China, an example, I would say, thank you very much. Do you know how many respirators and masks and all these things that have come? But almost that's politically challenging, because there'll be people out there and threatening. Why am I doing this? And people will be out there and they will say, okay, he's a China lover or he's an enemy. He goes on the other side. Because there will be people on the other sides and those people. And so I think I'll turn to you, Chris. You have a forum. Bring in the other sides, okay? Bring in those that are those who, let's say, have the most offensive policies that you think that are in positions of power, and have that together so that you can have thoughtful disagreement. I'm a believer in thoughtful disagreement, open, thoughtful disagreement to try to get at the right answer and have collectiveness. But it isn't easy in this world.
So, well, that's a good challenge to us. And I'm also a believer in thoughtless disagreement. I think, Corey, we're passionate disbelievers in the spreading of irrational hatred, like instinctual irrational hatred. And I feel like the stakes are so high right now that if...
But will you fight for that? In other words, when somebody is going to punch back and because this is what's needed. If somebody's going to punch back because you're saying something that's true and controversial, that'll be the test. Can you punch back for collective, decision-making, common decision-making, and then punch back?
I'm not going to say punch. I'm going to say fight back. Absolutely.
Okay, fight back.
That's good. Every fiber we have, if it means that we look weak or we're a threat, so damn well be it. Because this is the moment. I mean, everyone is impacting everyone else. We have a shot to nudge each other to be our better selves and to look at the stories of inspiration, the stories of humans reaching out to humans, of companies doing incredible things, letting go of the profit motive for a moment, of countries trying to help each other. There are stories about that. I think we need to amplify some of those stories more. And we're certainly down to do that. We're trying to do that every day. And Ray, I loved hearing you talk about some of the good things that China's doing and all the rest of it. Thank you for your voice and for spending this time and for being, honest and vigorous with us. And thank you everyone for listening. I mean, look, it's a big damn deal. If you're listening, it sounded like you just got a warning that this could be a multi-year recession, depression. That's scary. And more than ever, we need to be in this together, as we've said it again and again. So.
Absolutely.
Well, in conclusion, I know we're wrapping up. Yes, I believe this is a defining moment. We will get through it fine. We will be restructured in important ways. So that's fine. And thank you for, sharing ideas worth considering,
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you'd like to read more about Ray Dalio's ideas, check out his series on LinkedIn titled The Changing World Order. This week's show was produced by TED's distributed virtual media team. And our mix engineer is David Herman, our theme music by Alison Leighton Brown. Thank you so much for listening. Do feel free to share these episodes or to review them on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We read all those reviews. They're very helpful in helping us figure out the best way forward for this podcast. Mainly, though, stay safe and see you again soon.
PRX.